How did you get to New York City?
Well, little known fact, I was born on Long Island, but I was raised in Westchester and went to college upstate and kind of bounced around the state a little bit. And New York City I don't know if it was always in the cards, but after college, it seemed like that was where all the opportunities were. And my friends were moving there. So I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. See what happens when I get here.
Did you always know you wanted to get into photography, photojournalism?
I always loved photography, and I didn't know that much about photojournalism. I just loved taking pictures and meeting people. So when I first got to New York, I picked up random photo jobs here and there, but I was also a substitute teacher. And while I loved working with kids, one, being a substitute is quite challenging, especially in New York City. But two, it just wasn't my, it wasn't my like biggest passion. And one of the first, really the only internship I ever had was working as an intern in the photo department at Glamour magazine when it used to be at 4 Times Square. And that experience was really educational and eye-opening for me because I learned about the photo industry from the side of a magazine. And it was very informative, but it also helped me understand that working there in that kind of capacity was not what I wanted to do with my career.
Yeah.
And I was like fresh out of college, idealistic and naive, wanting to use my degree in anthropology for something. And I loved the hustle and bustle and getting to be creative, but it just wasn't for me forever.
So you learned what you didn't want to do.
Exactly. And that's what I was trying to articulate. I think being in that position, it really opened my eyes to what the industry, what the publishing industry was like, which I really had no concept of. And I also knew that I was itching to do something else. So actually about 8 months after I started interning at Glamour, a friend of mine had just come back from working at a clinic in rural Ghana before going off to medical school. And the more he told me about it, the more I kept thinking, like, I want to have that kind of an experience because he kept talking about just the people he met and the way that it changed his whole life. So within 6 months, I was also in Ghana.
Really?
Yeah. I connected with a school in the village where he was, and they coincidentally had a program set up with an organization where people could come and teach at their private school. And that, it was like right place, right time. I moved out there for 2 months and wanted to teach photography. I'd been inspired by other people who had done things like that. And I knew that these kids didn't really have access to cameras or visual storytelling. And I quickly learned they didn't really have much of an art program at all, if any. And so I went out there and I taught photography, fell in love with these kids, learned a lot about myself and how to be resilient and more resourceful. And it was really the first time I'd lived away, in that capacity. And that experience had such a profound impact on me that when I got back to New York, I set up a couple of fundraisers because when I was in Ghana, I asked if there was something I could do to support the school, to give back to the school, since they had given me so much in my 2 months. And they said, we'd love to have a well at our school. And, clean, potable water seemed like a nice idea.
Yeah.
So I ended up going back to New York, volunteering at Charity Water, which is like a big nonprofit here in New York that raises money and builds wells around the world. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to learn what it takes to build a well, and I'm going to do it myself. Which I actually did, but it was a lot harder than I could have ever imagined. And I hosted a pop-up exhibition in New York. I also hosted a bar event, just calling upon anyone that I had ever met to see if they would help me. And it's amazing, like how many people were so eager and willing to help. And I ended up raising about $11,000. And it took about 2 years and a lot of heartache, but we built the well at the school. And that, seeing the finished well helped me kind of connect all these dots. I saw something that I wanted, I saw an injustice. I wanted to help fix it, support these kids. And my photographs educated people, but they also, created this awareness and became a catalyst for change in these kids' lives. Photography can have that kind of an impact. I was hooked. And I think that actually is what led me down into the path of photojournalism, because I realized that I wanted to tell stories through photography, but I also wanted to, focus on stories that had meaning and impact beyond the photographs themselves.
How did you subsequently find the stories that you wanted to tell in your career? How does something like that come about?
I've always, this is going to sound a little like woo-woo, but like I trust in the universe. I've found that when I seek out stories, seek out projects that I'm interested in, there's a lot of stop and go and often doesn't come to fruition. Sometimes I just have to be interested in something and let it come together, if that makes any sense. I can't force it. After I got back from Ghana, I knew that I needed to sort of hone my skills as a photographer, and did a 1-year program at the International Center of Photography in New York City. And that helped sort of shape the way that I understood visual storytelling and how to all the components that you need to tell a story and things to think about, the kind of research to do. And that was sort of the extra education that I needed and the tools that I needed in my tool belt to equip me to tell stories. And at the end of that program, I met a photo editor from Newsday newspaper on Long Island who gave me a chance. And I had no experience with newspaper photography other than my college paper. Go Concordienses! Union College! And being thrown out into the wilderness of Long Island and all the types of stories that I was finding out there that they would find for me, I would just go shoot them. I think it helped me learn how to approach people. It helped me learn how to tell visual stories when you only have 5 minutes. It helped me connect with people quickly. It taught me all these valuable skills that when my first big project started to reveal itself, which was about my family when my parents were sick, I sort of was in the right place at the right time, professionally, personally, educationally, all those components, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about that, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. So I was on assignment. I remember this. I was on assignment with Newsday, probably photographing an apple pie contest or something, something like that, because it was a lot of feature stuff, which was so fun. And the fact that someone was paying me to photograph fun things was kind of the dream.
Yeah.
And I was just getting my feet wet in the industry when my parents called and said they wanted to take me to dinner. And I had this terrible feeling that my mom, who had had breast cancer on and off my entire life, was, maybe dying, was more sick than we realized. And we went to dinner in the East Village at my favorite restaurant, Cafe Orlin, which no longer exists. Great halloumi salad. And we sat down, and it was actually my dad who said that he had found out that he had stage 4 terminal pancreatic cancer. And it was inoperable, and he was most likely going to die. My dad was very black and white, so his delivery was harsh, but expected. And suddenly there were my parents, both in treatment. My mom had a recurrence with breast cancer, her second recurrence, so her third time with breast cancer a few months earlier, but she kind of treated her disease like an item on her to-do list. She had she'd been sick for so long. She knew exactly what to do, how to do it. She lived with her disease and really didn't want to worry us kids much about it. And now my dad was also in treatment, and they would actually go to treatment together up in Connecticut. And that was our new normal. So over the course of the next year, I ended up just spending time with my parents, photographing our regular life. As a freelancer, I was available. And the editors that I had been working with completely understood why I had to turn down assignments. And it was actually really beautiful because they were like, be with your parents and come back when you're ready, which is surreal because you work so hard to prove yourself and to not lose your spot in line as you hustle.
Yeah.
You don't say, when I freelanced for Newsday, I didn't say no to an assignment for at least 2 years, which meant a lot of other sacrifice, but I was willing to do it to prove to them that I could run with the rest of them and that they would remember me.
Yeah.
But they are also human, as it turns out, and they understood and encouraged me to spend time with my parents. So I ended up spending the next year basically commuting back and forth from the city to Westchester to be with them, to support them, to advocate for them. And I would photograph them because I didn't know how to be with them and just be. People say that photography is therapeutic and the camera can be a great tool when you're processing something difficult. And in theory, it makes sense, but it was hard to know if in practice it would work. And it absolutely worked for me. It gave me a purpose when I was there. I have no medical knowledge, but I could spend time with them, ask them questions, document our life. And what was really beautiful during that year was that, yes, they were sick, but so much of our life, so much of what we were experiencing, it wasn't really about dying. It was about kind of the contrast. It was about living. And, we ate a lot of really yummy food, like we weren't watching our calories, we were having these really profound conversations. We were taking little trips together. We were doing what we could. Obviously, they were in treatment, and treatment is, it wears a person down. So we did what we could. But I remember, I think it was my mom who was sort of like, when things kind of got bad for her, she was like, okay, well, maybe I can't go to my favorite Zumba class, but I could still like sit around the dinner table and like have great conversation with my family. And like, okay, maybe sitting around the dinner table is too hard now, but I could still hang out in my room, read a book, watch a movie. Like she had this wonderful perspective on how to keep living while dying. And that kind of helped carry us along. The long and short of it all really is that my dad, pancreatic cancer, as soon as you hear those words, you Google it, and you really shouldn't because the life expectancy is very low. Certainly not a year or past it. And so we knew we were on, borrowed time when he got that diagnosis. And for the first couple of months, and he, while he was in treatment, he seemed okay, which, maybe that partly was us feeling hope. Like hope helped us carry through in that experience. And you kind of forgot sometimes that the person in front of you was dying.
Yeah.
And in the mix of all of this, my then boyfriend, Kyle, and I had been together 7.5 years, and we had talked about getting married, but we weren't rushing until we had, a reason to rush. And we got engaged, decided to plan our wedding. We picked October 5th, 2013. And I think it kind of gave everyone something to look forward to and to live for. And it was definitely a distraction from what was actually happening. And honestly, when the day came, my parents looked amazing. They had a lot of energy. It was just this day of pure joy, not because it was my wedding, but because it was this beautiful celebration. We got very few no's to our invite because everyone wanted to be there, because I think everyone understood that maybe this would be kind of the last big moment we all had together as a family. My dad even said at the wedding, he was like, Nance, this is probably our last hurrah. Again, my dad was very black and white and funny like that, but he was right. And it was beautiful. And it was really so special. And I didn't mention this, but this is an important piece of it. Leading up to the wedding, I realized that I had taken all these pictures and I knew that my parents were dying, and I was worried that maybe I was missing something. You know, when you're working on a project, sometimes if you are too close to the subject matter, you're almost blind to things that are so familiar. This is my family, my life. Like, what if I'm missing something visually that's important to the story as a whole? As like a human, that doesn't matter, but as like a storytelling photographer, like that bothered me. Because I wanted it to feel complete. I didn't want to have any sort of what ifs after the fact. And I showed the photographs to a mentor of mine who actually encouraged me to share the photographs in a more public way, because she felt like maybe what I was doing would actually help someone going through what they were going through. And it's hard to imagine your own life having that kind of impact on a stranger's or someone else's. But I was terrified to publish the project. I didn't even know how to publish the project. So I submitted it to a contest, and I didn't win the contest, but I won something way more valuable, which was an email from an editor at the New York Times who was one of the judges on the panel wanting to publish my story. So fast forward to the wedding, he was actually at the wedding.
Wow.
Which was crazy. And the story around my family leading up to the wedding was published in the New York Times 2 weeks later. And our life changed forever. You know, like when you're going through something like terminal illness, you can, even as the caretaker, you feel alone because it's your life. And your world just gets so much smaller. And here we were, sort of the least alone we had ever felt, surrounded by strangers, you know, reaching out on every platform that existed, you know, voicemails on my parents' home phone, emails, social media, you name it, letters in the mail. It had really helped people. And my parents got to see that. My dad passed away about 4 weeks later. He actually died on December 7th, 2013, which was the 40th anniversary of his mother's death.
Wow.
And a year and a day since diagnosis. So he actually beat the odds, which was very Howie Borowick of him. And at that point, also my professional life had changed dramatically. You know, I was dealing with this personal loss and the challenges that come with, you know, I'm in my 20s and suddenly my dad died, but my career was taking off. And it was just a lot of mixed emotions to navigate that. Also, my mom was still alive and she was sick. And in that year, you know, things did start to take a turn for my mom, unfortunately, which was confusing because she was sick for so much of my life. I guess I thought she'd maybe be sick forever, which is so unfair. But she, you know, she treated it, like I said, like just as like a normal part of her day and I'm realizing now as both an older woman, but also as a mother, that I think she was trying to protect us kids from the reality of what was really happening. And 364 days after my dad died, my mom passed away. A day shy of the 1 year anniversary, which was, I think, both difficult and weirdly comforting, you know? Like I'm not religious, but like maybe I'm a little spiritual and I'm like, there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason, right? Like, life, you know, my dad wrote, so one of the things I jokingly, I like to share with people is that I asked my dad when he was dying if he was curious about people, what they might say about him at his funeral. And he told me, I don't wonder, I wrote it. And he handed me a manila envelope with his eulogy, which was 14 pages long and typed out in all capital letters. So he was legitimately screaming at people. But that was like, also, he was such a boomer. So my, you know, often people will say to me, how are you so positive? How can you talk about this? How can you remember it in this way? You know, both your parents died, you were in your 20s. Like it's sad. It's the grief, the grief is hard, and the grief has shifted with time because it's now been over 10 years.
Yeah.
It's been 12 years, and I've had time to think about the experience. I've had time to process what I went through. Now as a mom, I have a newer lens through which to see not just what I went through, but what they must have been going through as the parents. And I'm just so grateful that they were so open with me and allowed me to photograph them, because yes, I look back and I see lots of happy photos from our life together, but seeing that my parents in particular in these moments of like vulnerability and fear, it allows me to now as an adult better kind of understand who they were and maybe who I am in relation to who they were, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I can keep going or if you want to pause for a second.
I would love to hear about what happened with your career after this came out. And, you mentioned the New York Times exposure, but what's the difference between before and after? Where did your career as an artist go? I wasn't really, the lines were very blurred after my parents died and this project, had legs and was, the project took off, like I won all these big awards. I traveled the world exhibiting the photographs and sharing the stories of my parents and sharing the lessons that we all learned. It just became bigger than photography. And to this day, I still travel speaking about our experience. And I cherish that because I remember my parents so vividly. And I like to think that, I think back to those early days in Ghana where I saw the connection between my photographs and real life impact, and knowing that this story, the photographs are a big part of it, but the story and sharing the story in the way that I did and the way that my parents did has helped so many people. It just made me want more. I wanted to dive deeper into this kind of deep visual storytelling. And also use the platform that I've basically built for myself and have access to through these various publications and things like that, to help amplify other stories. So part of, so following my parents dying, my husband and I decided we needed to get out of town. And fast forward about a year, we ended up moving 8,000 miles away to the Pacific island of Guam. And we planted ourselves there and traveled Asia and just lived this magical, quiet island life for a little while until, of course, North Korea threatened to send nuclear missiles to Guam. And then I was the first call for many editors that I connected with earlier on because they thought, well, who do we know in Guam who could cover this? And it did help that when I was moving to Guam, I sent everyone off with like a cute little promo and stickers being like, I'm going to be in Guam just in case. And they remembered. And it was really wild. And so I was kind of, doors closed, but doors open. But you have to be open to the doors closing and the doors opening. Like, I can't. I am a very anxious person, so the fact that I allow myself to trust in the universe in that way seems insane, but it keeps proving itself again and again in my life and my career that if I'm open, if I put myself out there and I'm open, things will happen. Anyway, Guam was this pivotal moment in my life because my husband and I had removed ourselves from New York, which, as it turns out, New York seems to always be there. And that's comforting because, you could always go back. But it just felt like the right place, right time. And having a little bit of time away from kind of the hustle and bustle of New York allowed me time to properly grieve and process some of the trauma that I had been through losing my parents and to look at the whole experience and decide where I wanted to go next. And actually, the next move I made was I decided I wanted to publish a book about the work because the project that had really been published in the New York Times and other places was this final chapter of my parents' lives. But as we started to clean out my family home, there were all these little clues as to who my family was before the illness. And I felt like I needed to tell the whole story. And I'm also a scrapbooker, like born and raised cutting corners off of photos, writing in the white space. Like I get that from my dad. And so I had this dream of making a scrapbook. And so while we were living in Guam, I started putting together this vision of what a book could be. And I ended up doing a Kickstarter campaign, raising $65,000 from 740 people who believed in what this book could be. And I actually brought a copy of it with me to show you. I have to bring it to my next thing, so I can't believe it. But I wanted to show it to you because it's something you need to touch.
Wow.
And this became sort of the next step in my career because I saw the power in going deeper into the story and using all these context clues to really make it richer. And I just wanted to like package it up for myself, you know, and I didn't think I'd get to share it in the way that I did, but the Kickstarter allowed me to do that. And then I was actually in Amsterdam for the World Press Photo Awards, which is where I met a publisher who I partnered with to publish this book because I'm a photographer. I'm not a book publisher. I don't know anything about printing or distribution, though I do now. It's amazing how much you will learn. And that became like the next chapter in my life. But then also fast forward, my husband and I decided that we wanted to start a family. And I think losing my parents was really, that kind of clarified that for us. I think there was a moment where we could have gone either way, but losing my parents and his mother died when he was young, it just became like, what do we want? What do we want? In the grand scheme of things, will we regret having not done it in 10 years, in 15 years? Because at least in photography and in photojournalism, it felt like it was photojournalism or nothing. You can't not be all in to do the best work you want to do. And having a family seemed kind of impossible.
Yeah.
I went to therapy for years trying to actually like figure that out because I hadn't seen that many examples of it before. And I just decided, actually I was standing on stage at a photo conference in Canmore, Canada, outside of Banff, to a room of about 100 women sharing my story. And at the very end, I made some sort of a comment like, well, I don't really know where I'm going now, but you know, my husband and I have talked about maybe wanting to have a kid. I just don't know how to do that and be the photographer I want to be. And I was inundated by like, all these women after the fact. Most of the women there were family photographers. So they were photographers who had families of their own and they specialized in photographing families. And by the end of that day, I felt the confidence that I could make it work, which was really kind of cool.
What did they share with you?
They were just sort of like, what are your fears? And I was like, I don't know how to juggle the two. I don't know how to, I want to be able to like leave at a moment's notice to work on this really important story. I don't want to say no to assignments. I know that like to work on projects, you need to spend time. Like, and they were like, look, like projects will always be there. Having kids, you know, like is sort of, if you want to make it work, you make it work. It's a season. You know, at the beginning, it might be hard. Maybe you turn your lens inward and you photograph on something even more personal as you process what you're going through. I have a very supportive husband and partner. So like, I knew that I wouldn't be alone in this, which is super helpful and comforting. And it just felt like there were resources. I was very good at being like, it's impossible. And then people would be like, well, why, why? And, you know, you can maybe this is just another chapter like in Guam. You disappeared for 3 years and your career is still going. You made lemonade out of lemons, and why can't you do that with having kids? Maybe this is a natural progression of your family work and just a new chapter. It was sort of like a rebranding of what I imagined it to be, and that helped. Because maybe it was stories of family that I was really drawn to, and that looking inward at my own family, there was value. It just, it wasn't maybe as exciting as telling someone else's story, but I was open to the idea. And so I was like, you know what, we'll see what happens. Maybe I won't even get pregnant. And I immediately got pregnant. And Levi was born in October of 2019. And about 4.5 months later, COVID entered the chat. And I was stuck inside anyway. I wasn't going to be out shooting assignments. I had a newborn. I was recovering from a really traumatic birth of my son and emergency C-section. And I didn't even want to pick up my camera, frankly. I was just in a really dark place. And it truly wasn't until about a year after he was born. And I did some assignments here and there, but I didn't really take many photographs, and I just didn't feel like myself. It was very strange for me. And in retrospect, I realized it was postpartum depression. I just couldn't put a name on it at the time. At around 13 months, I decided that maybe if I could figure out something, process what I was feeling through photography, that it might help me the way that it helped me when my parents were dying. Novel idea. Maybe the camera is therapeutic, as I said earlier, right? Maybe I try to apply this again. And I decided that I wanted to tell stories about birth trauma. I think I realized that I felt very alone, and I wanted to feel less alone. And I remembered that feeling after publishing the story on my parents. So I decided to do what any sane person would do. And I posted on Facebook, does anyone have a story around birth trauma they want to share with me? And I was, my inbox was flooded.
Wow.
So instantly I felt less alone. I knew I wasn't alone, but you kind of have to see it to believe it, right? And actually, I was overwhelmed by the stories that were coming in, and I didn't really quite know what to do with them artistically, or I felt like I was suddenly carrying the weight of so much, and I didn't know how to do it justice. And Jim Estrin, the editor who published my story on my family, he said, well, why don't you think about it in terms of chapters? Why don't you start small and then branch out? Why don't you pick one kind of vignette of birth trauma to focus on, and maybe that'll help you. It'll help you, get beyond the surface level of birth trauma, because you don't know what the story is that you're trying to tell. Usually, I have now since learned that, yes, there's usually this story that you think you're telling, but the more time you spend with it, the more sort of the heart of the story appears, right?
Yeah.
The layers peel back and you see those universal themes. That is with the story on my family. I remember him saying, well, what's the story about? And this is how you know he's a good teacher. I said, it's about cancer. And he said, but what's it really about? And I was like, it's about my family, my parents. And he said, well, what's it really about? And I was like, it's about my relationship with my parents. It's about love. It's about loss. It's about grief. It's about, and I'm listing all these things. And he's like, yeah, those are the themes. Those are the things that people are going to connect to the most, whether they've experienced what you've experienced or not. And I tried to remember that when I started to approach this second project, because one of the messages I got on Facebook was from a grandmother who asked if I was going to tell stories around stillbirth. And I didn't know about stillbirth, but I started to dig in a little bit more, and that's sort of how the Lost Mother Stone began. She connected me to her granddaughter, or to her daughter, who had a stillbirth. So her grandson had died. And basically through word of mouth, as it usually happens, I got connected to many women who had had stillbirths. And I didn't realize stillbirth is actually pretty common. It's in the US, it's considered a pregnancy loss after 20 weeks. So between 20 and 40 weeks of gestation. And I think it was 2023, the National Institutes of Health report said that in the US, over 20,000 pregnancies are lost after 20 weeks every year. So that's 1 in every 175 pregnancies ending in stillbirth. And having just given birth to a child of my own, I was a mix of emotions. I felt deep sadness for these women, many of whom lost their intended child at, 37 weeks, 38 weeks. That's full term. That baby could have been delivered. I always thought the stillbirth was just something that happened, but I quickly learned that while there is a certain percentage, a small percentage of them that happen, and there's nothing you could do about it, there's a larger percentage of stillbirths that could be preventable. Other countries have actually put priority within their maternal health care systems to educate women, educate families on fetal movement, and even like monitoring blood pressure and like changing certain behaviors. And they've proven to reduce these rates. And what's so completely awful about stillbirth, I found, is that it's not just the loss of this child, it's the family that gets left behind. Like the system doesn't know what to do with mothers who have had stillbirths, with families. I've had women tell me that they couldn't get maternity leave because they didn't have a living child at home to take care of. Yet they still spent 9-10 months pregnant to lose this child at the very end. And hospitals don't even necessarily have to keep clear records. So that the stats aren't even correct. And the trauma and the grief that these women were feeling, I think I was drawn to them because I could relate in some capacity to a depth of grief that I didn't know possible. But I lost my parents in the natural order of things. They were bearing their children not in the natural order. And so I felt curious, and then I felt compassion, and then I felt rage. Because once I learned that there are things that we could be doing to educate women and families and society, but we don't because we're scared. It's so taboo that we're scared to even mention the word at the risk of making it a reality.
What are those things?
Like for example, this was so interesting. It's like kind of a saying, but it became like a hashtag. And I think the idea was to just sort of get into the minds of people. A lot of people in the stillbirth community will say like, know you're normal. So when I was pregnant with Levi, my first son, he never really kicked very much. I didn't think much of it. I was told that I had an anterior placenta, which was basically my placenta was buffering his kicks, which was lovely. I didn't really feel him kicking. But nothing ever changed during the pregnancy. He was never super active or super quiet. It was always like a little bit of kicking. And know you're normal. The idea is if something changes, at 37 weeks, that baby is basically full term, and they're not that different than they would be outside the womb, basically at that point. If that baby typically kicks in the morning, and they're like that every day for months on end, and you've noticed that for some reason this morning, nothing is happening. Yeah. Like I've have women say to me, I called and the nurse said the baby was running out of room. And that's just sort of a false idea. Like, yes, the space is maybe getting a tiny bit smaller, but the baby's movements shouldn't really change. I had one woman I interviewed, and she said that one night, while her baby was an active baby, one night there was this rush of movement, like almost like frantic movement. And she called the nurse, and they were basically like, oh, baby's going to be a soccer player, nothing to worry about. A few hours later, that movement slowed to almost a stop. And she called back again and they had her come in and the baby had died. Like the mother had noticed something. And there's also this thing about being a first-time mom. You like don't want to be annoying. It's so dumb. Like that you're scared to like be that mom that like bothers the doctor, bothers the nurses. But that's why you have them. That's why you have this healthcare. Like you're not the expert, but at the same time, you need to trust your intuition and push to come in. Like just, it's not going to hurt them to like get you on a monitor to make sure everything's okay. Because the difference of that time could have made the difference between like a living child and a dead child.
Yeah.
And the more and more I heard stories like this, I thought, okay, if doctors are not going to talk about it, if people are too scared to talk about it, how do I help these women educate pregnant people so they can better advocate for themselves? Actually, while I was working on this project, I was pregnant. I got pregnant with my second son. I really, after the first time, I was terrified and I was like, I'm never doing that again. This was the worst ever, blah, blah, blah. It was about 2 years in that I thought, okay, if I do want siblings. So if I can get pregnant again, I'm controlling as much as I possibly can control. And I had a very different situation. I chose a different doctor. I really like kind of set myself up for success, but also I was more educated. I understood what I was feeling, why I was feeling certain things, I started asking a million questions, probably more than I needed to. But I felt empowered because of what I had learned from these women. And I realized that I didn't want to scare pregnant people, but I wanted to give them the tools, because wouldn't you rather be educated and informed than surprised and devastated? If you could, if there was something you could do. And so I started meeting with women and sitting down with them and having conversations with them, just trying to learn about their experience, about who they've become since that loss and what they wished other people would know so they could better advocate for themselves. And so I feel like this anger inside me started to, it gave me some purpose and direction. And I thought, okay, I can use the tools that I have, my photography, interviewing these women and hearing their words and hearing their stories and connecting with them. And maybe I can help share their stories and maybe it'll help somebody out there.
Yeah.
Whether they are pregnant or maybe they've already had a loss and they feel alone. I don't think I could have imagined the journey this project would have now taken me on. I don't think that's the thing. You like trust in the universe and things you allow things to unfold. At least I did. And there were so many elements of this project that surprised me. One, when I was pregnant with my second son, I suddenly had like a couple dozen women checking on me every day. These women that I became so close with many of these women because they, like me, were mothers. And we had this not the shared experience of a lost child, but this shared grief and shared trauma. And something so beautiful was that at the end of every interview and photo and portrait session that I did, each and every one said to me, whether I make the final cut of this project, like, thank you. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Yeah.
So few people want to talk about this. And that's like this double, their trauma gets compounded by the fact that people are so scared to talk about it that they don't. And they feel very alone. And it's like, I remember after my dad died, after my dad died, there were people that we never heard from again. And that was hard at first, but then I understood and came to realize that not everyone knows how to talk about or deal with illness and death. And it's unfortunate that they disappeared, but also like it's, I can't carry that. And it's okay. It's okay. It's like, but if I can help people find the words, if I can, even I heard from a girl I went to high school with a few months ago. She texted me and she said, I had a stillbirth a month ago and I Googled
stillbirth. I didn't know anything about it, and your project came up.
Wow.
Thank you. And so anyway, that project has also had a little bit of a life of its own, though it's been hard to get it published. I did ultimately get it published on NPR, which was a gift. And then it's won a few awards. And so it's been exhibited. And that was my goal, to get it in front of people who wouldn't seek it out, but now have a little extra special knowledge, because maybe that will help them or someone they know. Yeah. In the mix of all of that, I did need some things to photograph that were a bit lighter on my heart. I'm a joy at parties. I love talking death. But after my dad died, about 3 months after my dad died, and the editor that I worked with at Newsday called me and said, "I know you're grieving, and I don't want to bother you, but I know you're a dog person, and the Westminster Kennel Club dog show is coming to town. Do you want to photograph it?" And I said, "Absolutely, I do." And that assignment brought me back to the world of the living. And fast forward, my mom dies. 3 months later, she calls me again. "Do you want to shoot it?" I said yes, and it brought me back. And that actually led me down a path to another project that I continue to this day. It's an ongoing project about dogs and the humans who own, breed, and show them. And it brings me joy. I just haven't had time to really focus on it. But I also have 2 little humans of my own that I'm trying to raise to be good humans and happy humans. And we left New York again, where I'm in New York back and forth, but we're planted in St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands, living this beautiful island life. It's quieter, it's simpler. I'm pivoting and rebranding because I got to work. Yeah. And actually, a big business down there is family photo shoots, which at first I was sort of like, I'm a journalist. I want to be doing more meaningful stories. But in this season and chapter of my life, photographing other families' joy is not only joyful, it pays the bills, and I get to be home by bedtime, and that's okay. It's okay to have chapters, right? That's what I tell myself. Oh no. We have a hard stop. Sorry. This is why it's dangerous to do a podcast with me, because I could just talk for hours. And you're a good listener.
Well, thank you.
So that's me in a nutshell. I didn't let you ask any questions.
No, you did. You did. I think that's probably a good place to stop.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh my God. Thank you for listening. It's been so awesome getting to share my stories with you.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, this has been a treat.